Hey team, today I'm going to show you how to cook some amazing pork ribs in the Flaming Coals offset smoker. Here we have two types of pork ribs. We have our spare ribs and we have our baby back ribs. Now the baby back ribs are shorter, as you can see. They're curved and they have a bit more meat across the top of them. There's also considerably less fat in between each of the ribs, so you need to be really careful not to dry them out. The spare ribs, as you can see, are longer, are flatter, and have quite a bit more fat in between the bones, which adds even extra flavour. Now personally, I love the flavour of the spare rib, but I do find that the baby back ribs are a bit easier to eat. Now the first thing we're going to do is remove any excess fat from the top and the side of the ribs. Now these ones aren't too bad, but there's a little bit here on the baby back which we're going to trim up, as well as on the side of the spare ribs there. We've trimmed a tiny amount of fat off the top of the ribs. We're going to flip it over, trim the underside and remove the membrane. When it comes to removing the back of the membrane from the ribs, the easiest way I find is to either use a blunt knife or the back of a spoon to get in there and slowly pry it off. The reason why we remove the membrane is it just makes it a lot nicer to eat. You don't have that chewiness from the membrane, but also it allows us to put rub on the underside and adds that extra flavour. Today we're rubbing our ribs with the Flaming Coals Porkinator rub, which is going to add a little bit of sweet, a little bit of spice and a little bit of tang. Pro tip, start with the underside first and pat it in, then that way when you flip it over, you can rub the top side and pop it straight into the smoker. Our pork ribs are all rubbed up. We're going to leave them here so the rub can penetrate, and we're going to get the offset smoker lit. Now to get our offset started, I'm going to be using some Flaming Coals lump charcoal, starting off with about 1.5 kilos. And today, to speed things up, we're going to light it using the Flaming Coals charcoal starter wand. Now if you don't have a charcoal starter wand to light your fire, you can also use a chimney or just some fire lighters. Just keep in mind they are going to take a little bit longer. Now to make our life a bit easier today, to both get it up to temperature and also help maintain a stable temperature, we're taking advantage of the Flaming Coals Tempmaster Pro. So what we've done is we've attached it to the side of our offset smoker, we've removed the bottom vent and put the adapter plate on. Now you can see we've attached a fan, and then the fan attaches to this control box. Now here is where we can set our temperature. So at the moment you can see that we're currently sitting at 61 degrees Celsius, and we can easily toggle up and down to see our target temperature. So our target temperature today is 121 Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can also change the reading from both Celsius to Fahrenheit as well. Now as the pit reaches our target temperature of 121 Celsius, automatically the fan will stop. Then once the temperature starts to dip lower than our target temperature, the fan will kick back in to pump more oxygen through the fire and warming up our pit. Our pit's now up to temperature. It's time to get the pork ribs into the smoker. Our pork ribs have been in the smoker at 250 Fahrenheit for just over an hour, so it's time to see how they're going and give it a little spritz. So spritzing the meat with apple juice adds a bit of flavour, but also keeps them nice and moist and stops them from burning. Our pork ribs have been smoking in our offset smoker for 2.5 hours at 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 121 Celsius. Let's take a look, shall we? They are looking and smelling absolutely delicious. Time to get them out of the smoker and give them a wrap. Today we're wrapping our pork ribs in some thick aluminium foil. But before we wrap it, we're gonna add some extra flavor. So I've got some butter, which we're gonna put on, and this is gonna melt up beautifully. Don't be shy. It all adds extra flavor. We're gonna get some brown sugar. Again, be generous. And then finally, if all that wasn't enough, we're gonna get some honey. We're gonna drizzle it over the top. Beautiful. Let's wrap this up nice and tight and pop it back inside the smoker. Our pork ribs have been cooking for 2.5 hours unwrapped and for another 2 hours wrapped. So I reckon they're about ready, but let's take a look. We'll probe them and see whether it's ready to sauce. Be very careful with this because there's a lot of liquid inside. Oh, look at this. You see the meat's pulled away from the bone. Amazing. They're both ready for saucing. We have 2 racks of ribs and we have 2 different sauces to glaze with. We've preheated our sauce and we're going to start off with the Big Boy Barbecue rib glaze. And with our second rack of ribs, we're going to glaze it with Lane's Kinda Sweet. So our ribs are sauced, it's time to pop it back in the smoker to let the sauce sit on the ribs. So to recap, these pork ribs were in the smoker unwrapped for 2.5 hours, then we wrapped them for another 2 hours, we sauced them up and we popped them back in the smoker for about another 20 minutes. So after smelling these things cooking for close to 5 hours, I'm ready to dig in. Let's slice them up. Now just a bit of a tip, to make it easier to cut, flip them over because then the bones are a little bit more visible and you can cut in between the bones. Now the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to dig in. Perfect. And now let's try our spare ribs.